Well, welcome. My name is Jeff Rao. I'm the Director of Public Works with the Village of Oregon. To my left is Lauren Striegel. She is the Assistant Director of Public Works. Has been with us for 5 months? 4 or 5 months. She's been helping out a lot. And to my right is Nick Hack. He's the Street Superintendent. He's actually worked with the village for over 20 years, right? Almost 20 years. But recently moved up to the role of Street Superintendent. And is charge of our public works staff in their day-to-day operations. I want tonight to be really a time to listen, for us to help answer any questions there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of things that surround how we conduct the business of public works, particularly with mowing and mowing practices. Where we have ended up today is the Village Board and the Public Works Committee and Sustainability Committee have kind of asked us to look at our mowing practices. Why do we mow certain areas? How often do we mow certain areas? And how we maintain certain areas going forward. And so what we've done is committed to have at least 2 of these public forums. This is the first of that series. Basically, it's listening sessions. I want these to be comfortable times where we can talk about things, answer questions. The only thing I ask is everyone is be treated respectfully. If I feel that it is becoming not respectful, then we'll just terminate that discussion and move on. But I think I'm looking forward to this. I think this is a time where we can talk about how we move forward, be able to report back to the committees and the village board for future direction on how we take care of things in the village. And I do believe there's some solutions that can actually be beneficial to all parties. And unfortunately, that doesn't always mean that that's the most beneficial thing for the village. May not be the most thing that you would like behind your homes or in your villages. So just want to talk a little bit about the village, and if you haven't received a copy, I just prepared a brief memo that kind of is meant to be mostly factual, and talks about basically the many things that we take care of in public works. You can read through that. I've also listed all of the equipment that we use for mowing practices, and you'll see that we have quite a bit of equipment that we use for mowing. 2 of those pieces of equipment alone are about $110,000 a piece. Those are our Toro Groundmaster mowers, and you'll see those going around town. Those are the ones primarily for parks and open spaces and playing fields. They're big, red. I think they're 16 feet wide, and as well as a lot of other mowers and everything. We estimate it's about $500,000 worth of equipment that we use for mowing practices in the village, and we do an excellent job. Nick, our mechanic, and our crews do an excellent job of maintaining those and taking care of those. But we do mow approximately 286 acres of land in the village, and during the peak growing season, that can be a considerable challenge for us just to be able to keep up with that, as well as just be able to meet everybody's expectations, which isn't always the same. Of those 286, 192 are considered primary areas, and those are mostly public parks, walking paths, type of stuff that we should be, I think, mowing on a very regular basis. 79 of those I consider as secondary areas, and those include drainageways and drainage ponds. And then the remaining 15 acres are roadway shoulders, such as Lincoln Road, Netherwood Road, and those areas that we have still kind of rural sections within our village, rural roadway sections within our village. This past April, the Oregon Nature Alliance brought a proposition before the village board for No Mow May. This was the first time that we've ever participated in that. I think it's been a popular program in the Madison area as well as throughout other communities in Dane County. And that was at the request of the village boards. We pretty much halted mowing on just about everything except for playing fields. And I think there was a lot of feedback we got from people on the success and or failure of that. And we can talk a little bit about that as some of the questions come up that we may have. You know, the forum tonight is not an event where we're going to necessarily walk out of here with all the solutions and all the answers. I really think it's important to solicit ideas, solicit suggestions, talk about why we may do one thing over another thing. And you'll see in the packet there on page 2, there are really a bunch of options that we can consider moving forward. I will admit that one of the fallacies that I really acknowledged and saw in the No Mow May was the lack of access to playgrounds. And that was something that I agree completely. You know, in the future, if we were to implement a program like that, we would definitely create mowing areas around playgrounds, paths to playgrounds, that type of stuff. Those are great suggestions, I think, that can help make some of these programs work really well. But you can see some of the options, and then I've listed like the 7th option, other options as discussed in the forums that maybe we haven't thought of or we haven't really pursued. Information gathered tonight, as well as in the other forums, are going to be assembled in a report where we will talk about the pros, the cons, some of the discussion items that we have, and be able to bring those back to our committees as well as to the village board for final direction for 2023 and going forward. And so we do see this as a roadmap of where we will be going at the direction of the village board. Again, we ask all comments, submittals, and discussion be kept professional and with courtesy and respect given to all parties. We thank you for your input on all of that. Keeping this as an open forum, we're here to answer questions. We're here to listen to comments that you may have, and whether you filled out a form or not is not really critical. The only thing we just ask for Peggy's note-taking. Peggy is our department our Director of Administrative Services over here, and Peggy's kind of keeping track with notes and everything, and so we'll have some minutes on the meeting. But we just ask that you give your name and an address of where you are, and then we'll be able to record comments and make sure that we have a complete record of tonight's proceedings. So if you have any questions or if you'd like to speak, we'd be happy to talk about this. So if anyone want to go first? Sure. Great. Just come on up and make sure you speak into the microphones, and we'll pass this one around as necessary.
My name is Mark Seibertson. I live at 657 North Prairie Parkway. We've lived in the village in that home since 1995, and we purchased our home in large part due to the location. We're adjacent to, I think what's referred to as a drainage way in the memo, but we refer to it as a green space because it's, it's really a nice area. Kids like to play out there. So it's a nice thing for us living in that area. I would speak in favor of portions of the memo. I don't have any problem with the No Mow May. I think that's it's friendly to the bees and the birds and just nature in general. So I don't have a big issue with that one. However, I would speak against numbers 5 and 6, either reducing mowing for green spaces or drainage ways, or eliminating mowing. The reason, I have a couple of reasons. One is it looks nice when it's mowed, and when it's not mowed, it doesn't look nice. Mosquitoes have a habit of, as if the area is not mowed, I think it definitely increases the mosquito population. It drains better if it's mowed, and it is either a green space or a drainage way, but the purpose is to keep the water going and moving. It definitely dries out faster when it's mowed than when it's not mowed. So in short, those are my comments, and we'd really like things to continue the way they have in roughly the last 30 years that we've lived there, because it enhances the value of our home and our appreciation of that area.
Mark, in your 30 years living there, what have you seen? Has it gotten worse? You know, because you've been there back when it was nearly new constructed, correct? That drainageway behind your house it goes from concrete ditch to open grass swale back there.
So what we note is that when it rains, my 1-inch rain gauge is when the water rises to my property line and the neighbor across the way's property line.
With
And
1
then
inch of rain?
And the water is relatively quick to disperse, except for the low spots in that area.
Has it always been that way, or has it changed, do you think, in
Yes.
the time?
And there have been instances, several instances where, you know, the rain is prohibited because it either continues or, you know, there's rain for several days and then the mowing is not able to be done. You have new equipment that I think there's some 4-wheel drive mowers that you have that can soldier on through some of those areas where they used to get stuck.
Yeah. But in your 30 years of being there, it's been kind of about the same. I mean, I guess hydrologically, we've seen some changes. At least I've witnessed some changes. You know, and we're getting more and more water. I guess, you know, has it always kind of been difficult to mow?
Yes, behind your house, it has been. Typically has been since I worked here.
Okay.
Yep.
I've talked with the village, I think maybe with you, Jeff, not with you, Nick, but I've talked about getting either that regraded or getting some fill. And that would really help with the low spots that collect water. Basically, it hasn't changed significantly over that 30-year period. Although we do, you know, we've lost some trees.
Yeah, I was going to say we've
That's-
lost some trees, you know, probably because like we've talked about before, they've been saturated much longer than before.
Yeah,
Some big trees, that cottonwood tree was about,
sorry.
that cottonwood tree was maybe about 7
Yeah.
years ago or something like that.
Yeah, the neighbor who lives adjacent to where the cottonwood was is an arborist. And he thinks that tree sucked a lot of water out of there, and which is kind of an interesting thought. But I can't speak to that, but him being an arborist probably
You
can.
would know better than myself. Or,
Yeah,
okay.
thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Joe Spock from 475 Claydell Street. I decided to get up right after Mark because mine is pretty similar. Speaking of my house and the neighborhood, the High Meadows neighborhood adjusts or backs up to a water detention area, detention area, and also the High Meadows Park. And so I know we've had discussions about this before about keeping that area mowed. Similar to Mark, that area is like what brings that neighborhood together. All the houses kind of butt up to it. And so we can, all the neighborhood kids can play there when it's mowed and nice and good. And it kind of seamlessly connects to the High Meadows Park area and the soccer fields as well. So the soccer teams use that area for practice. The spectators sitting there. So this year it was I felt kind of bad for the people playing soccer because all the spectators were in tall grass and whatnot. So, yeah, so the blue area is the water detention area, but all the houses like 443 all the way through 135, they kind of create It's like a nice neighborhood space to play and do recreation, so it wasn't really usable this year. So I would advocate for that to continue to get mowed regularly. It's really nice when it's mowed regularly. When it's not mowed regularly, it just gets to be a grassy mess, and it's difficult to use, especially for soccer and baseball and whatnot. I do appreciate the No Mow May concept. I think one area where there is maybe places to reduce mowing would be the water detention area off Claydell Street and Ames, kind of on the bottom right corner over there. Yep. Yeah, that one is fenced in, so no one can even access it. So I could see that being an area where something else could happen. I'm not really sure why it's fenced. That's always kind of a question I had, but yeah. Because it seems like a nice space. I don't know what it could be used for, or, you know, it's kind of in a strange area, but that'd be one area where I don't think mowing would be 100% year-round or anything, yeah, so.
Probably, my guess is when they were doing these apartments, they figured there might be children in the area. I'm just guessing
Yeah.
here, but it seemed like, and then they probably thought that'd be a safety measure. Would be, but both of those are, just like you say, dry pods or dry detention areas.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Teresa Nelson. I'm with the Oregon Nature Alliance. I live at 245 Drumlin Circle in the village. And I want to commend the village on looking more closely at this issue, because I think it is something very important to look at, especially now. And as a representative of the Oregon Nature Alliance, I commend the village for participating in No Mow May. Actually, when we brought it to the village, we didn't necessarily expect the village to participate. So that was a bonus. And, mowing has many purposes, and it's not really a black and white issue. I think the values of our community should be reflected in our mowing policies, though I'm aware that some of those might conflict throughout the community. But given the need to mitigate and adapt to climate change, as well as the pressing issues of habitat loss and deteriorating water quality, I think the decisions we make regarding mowing can have a really positive impact on addressing some of those issues. And first I wanted to look at some suggestions for reasons to keep grass mowed short. So obviously sports playing fields and the access to those, just like you had mentioned, Jeff. The playground areas, access to those. Areas where safety is an issue along roadsides to maintain sight lines. To manage invasive species, and I don't know how much is targeted in the village for managing invasive species, but there's that's one reason to mow, and there's publications out there that describe the timing for certain species and how you can manage some of those and keep those down by mowing at certain times. And then also to manage woody vegetation. There's areas where we don't want trees to grow, alongside our ponds where we're trying to maintain those slopes, and if we have woody vegetation that shades out the other vegetation that their roots are holding in those slopes, that can lead to erosion. So that's a good reason. Same thing along other waterways. And then native prairie areas. So a lot of our native vegetation has evolved with fire, and that's not something we can do very much in the village. And so mowing is an alternative for kind of mimicking that fire response. So some reasons not to mow. Obviously, mowing or not mowing and letting vegetation grow longer does provide habitat, provides food and shelter for birds and pollinators and other wildlife. And if that vegetation is more managed to be more native vegetation, we really can enhance the pollinator habitat. And really we could address some of the issues that were mentioned earlier. You know, a nice prairie planting, a wetland planting with a lot of nice flowers and really looking at that vegetation community can be a very nice thing to look at. And it also can help with drainage because that vegetation and those deep roots can help move that water and evapotranspirate from the ground and up, and trees also are a part of that. And it also can help manage mosquitoes because you're providing habitat for the things that eat the mosquitoes. So, you know, I already mentioned the erosion control along ponds. Those roots of that vegetation help hold that soil in place. That vegetation also provides filtering and water quality benefits. Again, adjacent to our waterways, that's extremely important. And then reducing mowing reduces our fossil fuel usage, it improves our air quality, and it obviously saves village staff time and wear and tear on equipment, and you know, allows the village staff to do other important things in a very, you know, strapped time. So some considerations with mowing is timing. Again, I mentioned the invasive species, but also thinking about nesting seasons for birds and also insect habitat. I noticed the drainage way along Jefferson Street at the Alpine Parkway Jefferson intersection just to the east of that was recently mowed, and man, there was a huge stand of common milkweed on there before it got mowed. You know, full bloom.
Over, where over?
Right next to the, adjacent to that detention basin on the north side.
Just
Yeah.
over here?
No, again,
over here?
along the street, yep.
Oh, right there.
On the other side, on the north side of the
Side.
street.
Yeah.
Yep, right through there on the east side of Alpine Parkway. But, you know, like that's a consideration for timing of mowing. Areas that do need to be mowed maybe only once a year or once every few years, you could look at the timing of that to not impact the things that are maybe growing or living there. You know, spring mowing before things start growing to get rid of that, you know, dead vegetation can work. The frequency of mowing, you know, controlling woody vegetation, it doesn't have to be multiple times a year. It could even be, you know, every 2 to 3 years. To control that woody vegetation. Height is another consideration. Does it have to be mowed at 3 or 4 inches, or could it be mowed higher? And then some alternatives, especially looking at invasive weed control. You know, does it need to be mowed, or would it be better to do some very, you know, spotted herbicide treatment? You know, those are things that can be looked at. Controlled burns, if it's possible, that's another alternative to mowing. And also looking at potentially electric equipment. As far as No Mow May, I think it should continue in some form. It maybe does not have to look like what it did this year. It was kind of a quick thing, and I don't know if any of us were really prepared for everything that came along with it. But as somebody who's participated in the last couple years and who read the comments in our community forums, you know, I think there's things that we can change. Some of the things that you already mentioned, Jeff, as far as playgrounds and access to the sports fields. You know, we can target the participation of the village in areas where there are flowering plants that would grow if we didn't mow. I mean, that's the purpose of No Mow May. If you just have grass, there's no reason to do it. Just long grass doesn't do a whole lot. We're trying to target those early pollinators that need those flowering species in that time of month. You know, if
And
leaving...
dandelions, I think are considered really low quality.
They're low quality, yeah. You know, I wouldn't say like, yay, dandelions, but, you know, is it better than nothing? Probably. I mean, participating in No Mow May isn't the only thing we should be doing to support pollinators. It's something that I think is a really great visual representation of some of the changes that need to go on. And it's something that kind of brings people, they notice it, they talk about it, you know, and I think that can really be a learning experience for a lot of different people. You know, if leaving the grass not mowed all month makes it hard to mow at the end of the month, well, then you need to look at what equipment you have and maybe do a low mow May. So maybe you only mow once or twice. And I think that it would be very useful for the village to create a website that kind of explains the reasons for No Mow May if choose to continue, have a website, explains the reasons, why people would participate, what the village and how the village is participating. I think that would be a great place to direct people so that they can get that information, and the Oregon Nature Alliance can help provide information for that if needed. But ultimately, I would envision a mowing map that's more than 3 colors, and looking at, the vegetation type, the uses, and how all of those intersect, so that we can kind of do better overall for everybody.
Yes, I think that's great. I have some questions, if you're available. One of the things that kept coming back, and I don't know what you've learned or what you know about this, but when on unmowed areas, usually the comments we get is increasing mosquitoes, rodents, ticks, that kind of, on the negative side. Is that your experience, or what? I mean, what have you found in your research and your time you spent?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about creating habitat, what are we creating habitat for? We're creating habitat for insects, for animals, and so if people are not interested in having habitat in their backyard, then I can see why you would be getting those kind of complaints. As far as ticks, what I've read is that ticks are most prevalent where there are the host animals for that, and white-tailed deer are a big one. Some of the smaller animals do, but from what I've read, like urban populations of ticks are generally pretty low. So
Even in tall grasses and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you might have there might be the same number there. You might have a slightly higher chance of picking one up if you're going through taller grass. But if there's areas that people aren't using actively, then I wouldn't see that as a big of issue.
I was really impressed. I was out walking in Anderson County Park last week, and it was a warm afternoon, and I walked back. I think they have a pollinator garden in the far back corner of the Prairie area.
Yep.
I was very impressed with, I mean, quite honestly, just the number of butterflies that were around that. So, I mean, to me, it was kind of eye-opening, and in the right type of plants and the right type of the right type of environment really did do a lot.
If you plant it, they will come.
Right, and so I'm wondering if part of this solution is somehow some public education and outreach to help people in making, I mean, like you say, being more effective. I agree. I mean, no mowing, the only thing No Mow May did for me was really a very long lawn, and my neighbors went the whole month. I couldn't make it the whole month. They went the whole month, and it took them like 6 hours to mow their lawn, and it was bagged, and it was like
Whereas we have a mulching mower, and we mowed it, tall, the first time, and it took us about the same amount of time. So it depends on the equipment you have, and understanding that.
Right. Have Lauren talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing in Public Works for our electric fleet, and some of the things that we're looking at kind of going forward with that.
Excellent. Well, I'm actually going to just touch on this real briefly, and I think Nick is more the expert in this field than I am, especially when it comes to things like mowing equipment and the heavy-duty work equipment that we use and how to electrify that. We are looking at going to a lower carbon fleet in general on the public works side, but also village-wide. And right now we're trying to be very deliberate about it, but also very moving forward with it. So, we're not made of money as the village. We can't just scrap everything that we have and buy all electric equipment, but what we're trying to do is identify areas that it makes sense and start bringing it into our fleet as these opportunities come up. What we're really targeting right now is more on the passenger vehicle side. So things like trucks or any kind of fleet cars that come up, we would look at electrifying those. I'm going to pass it over to Nick now. He has done a lot of research on electric mowers, electric dump trucks, a lot of these bigger equipment pieces that aren't quite as straightforward.
As far as electric mowers, we went to an electric show, I don't know, 2 months ago. And the technology for what we do isn't quite there yet. For residential, it's probably there. Our grass, we mow at 3.5 inches. Sometimes we don't get there for 2 weeks depending on the weather. So we could be upwards of 5 inches of grass for mowing. And they made it sound like they're not quite there to cut that much grass. They don't have enough RPMs in the mowers to cut that length of grass, so. And battery time. I've heard of one municipality pretty close to us that has electric zero turn, and it sounds like it sits in the shed and nobody wants to touch it, to be honest. They say it's just, like I said, it just doesn't have the power of, our mowers that we use now, so.
I think, as we look into, go 10 years ago, if you look at electric cars, were kind of a fad and almost kind of people were too worried about. Nowadays, it's taking up a very large percentage of our, of cars purchased. So we look at it the same way as far as, as we move forward, as the technology gets better and better, we definitely would like to see that. And they're quieter, that's what, they're quieter. Obviously, it just can't take 7 hours of operation in a day. And what I'm reading so far is you just need to buy more batteries, which kind of has its pros and cons with it too. But just to let you know and reassure your group that something that we do, and village board and committees, the sustainability committee has tasked us with making sure we're doing the due diligence to at least look at that on a very regular basis.
Great.
So, and grants. Lauren's been preparing some grants. We think that federal money and state money will continue to kind of help get us into that, because when we looked at recently just to purchase like our water van, the van was about $20,000 or $30,000. Well, it was more expensive to buy just a regular electric vehicle, but the charging station alone was going to cost us almost $70,000 or $80,000 to bring that into the public workshop. So there's some upfront costs, and our feelings, if we can get that covered with the grant program, that's something that can really help get our foot in the door on something like that.
Question for Teresa.
Yeah.
And I apologize if you touched on this. I know that Jeff had mentioned the quality of dandelions in particular as I guess a pollinating or something for pollinators. Has your group looked kind of numerically, I'm sure you have, but can you give me an idea of what the trade-off would be? How much area, if we were to move forward or look at setting aside certain quantities of area in new park projects or in drainage areas that, maybe deliberately were planted in kind of a high-quality prairie mix, what kind of bang for the buck would we get in that event, and then mowing, a lot of these other areas, so that you weren't just looking at kind of your sledgehammer, don't mow anything approach, but really kind of getting some of these really high quality areas and letting those go and taking a more active maintenance approach. Do you guys have numbers on that or any idea of what that would look like?
I don't know what it would look like if you planted a certain acreage of native
Right.
plants versus how that would impact versus like leaving dandelions. But to me, planting any additional acreage in native plants is going to be a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to say we're going to do all of this native planting and manage that so that it continues, and so then we're going to mow these dandelions a little bit more often. I don't think anybody would be sad about that necessarily.
Sure.
When you understand the value of that native plant community versus a non-native dandelion.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions for us?
Nope.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
And Susan?
Susan Shedovy. I live at 1860 County Road MM. which is just north of Oregon. I'm just outside of the village. But I do all my business and all my shopping in the village.
You're a former resident too.
I am. I lived on Main Street for probably 20 years. I really appreciate the comments that were made, and I agree with everything that's been said. I would like to see areas in the village where we can use native plants. For instance, the big pots on Main Street, we're paying someone to plant those, and I notice no natives in those pots. In fact, I was driving through town just today, and coral bells were in most of the pots. I think we can plant natives in areas like that. Whoever it is that we hire, that the village hires to plant those can be done in natives. Also, as I drive into the village, I'm constantly thinking, man, these roundabouts could be much more attractive. The roundabouts maybe are part of the county. I don't know who manages that, if it's the village or the county, but I think those could be natives, because right now they're not very attractive and they really don't support any type of wildlife. I think of places, as we're entering the village by McDonald's there are areas where the mowers cannot mow because there's wires and there's telephone poles. Those could be native plantings. Right now they're just kind of weeds. I just think there are a lot of opportunities in the village to plant natives in addition to whatever policies end up being chosen for the No Mow May. And also I'm noticing, more and more people are planting native plants in their yards, and I think the village can help educate more people about the value of doing that. We could have a very beautiful village with a lot of native plantings if we thought of all the different areas that we could do that. Another thing I think of is the dog park. I noticed that now there are areas of the dog park that are not being mowed, which is great, but I really think throwing some prairie seeds out there would be great. I love to go to Prairie Mound County Park, which is a huge dog park on the way to Verona, and one of the reasons I love it is they plant natives there. It's just gorgeous every time of the year you go there. And the dog park in Oregon is a place that we could be doing that. Not sure if there were a few other things that I could have mentioned, but anyway, I just think I know. I wanted to mention when the policy came up to reimburse people for planting trees along their apron, I noticed the tree species tend to be species that do not encourage insects. The ginkgo, for instance, that's on the list. I don't have the list memorized, but as I went down the list, I thought, a lot of those plants do not support any insect life. And if they don't support insect life, then they do not support birds either. If you read anything by Doug Tallamy, he's a big supporter of oak trees. But there are a lot of trees besides oak trees. And I somewhat wish that the village would have given a choice of trees that would support insect life.
Yeah, some of the challenges that we have is, so whenever anyone, that list is just a recommended list, for a couple reasons. Number one, we want to try to choose trees that are not going to heave roads and sidewalks, which is always a tricky thing, because once a tree starts affecting a sidewalk, someone calls Public Works and say, you guys have to come out and fix it, and then we have to tell them, well, actually, per the ordinance, they have to fix it.
Yeah.
But the other problem with sometimes flowering trees, I agree with you, I love flowering trees, but flowering trees usually bear fruit, and then fruit falls on the sidewalks, and that's why we don't allow, a lot of crab apples and that type of stuff, or like fruit trees. But there are some trees there that I do think support some of that, but those are kind of terrace trees are always, terrace tree, not terraced trees, but terrace trees are always a tricky one, because you're trying to fit them in a really small area, and you don't want something that's going to affect traffic and visibility, allow people to walk by and everything like that. So,
And maybe a little more research can be done along that line.
Yeah. The downtown pots, I just want to make sure everyone knows, the downtown pots, the village buys the plants, but those are all volunteer planted and maintained. So we do not pay anything to the group that has graciously and for a very long time come down, maintain them, plant them. They do a great job. I'm not sure how many more years they're gonna do that, but, those are options to look at for like maybe some perennials, that would be native, I think would be, and maybe that's something, Teresa's group might wanna take on some of the pots every year or something like that. You
We
know
could
what
have an
village-
adopt-a-pot program.
Adopt a pot program. Yes, well, and I will say, I mean, we as Public Works, we have, once to twice a week, we have an individual go around with our water trailer and water all of those pots and everything like that. I mean, they look great, but I can see what you're saying on those. I just want to make sure you knew that those are all volunteers.
Well,
and-
that's good to know.
Yeah.
But I think the choice of plants is something maybe the village could look at then.
Yeah, yeah, and I think some of the challenge, honestly, when it comes to a lot of that, understanding the type of plants, maintaining the type of plants, those are not expertise areas of myself, Nick, Lauren. We are not master gardeners, and we're not horticulturists by any stretch. And so that can be a real challenge and almost intimidating at times. And that's where sometimes when you're able to work with groups that know how to do that, really does help us out a lot. Because our staff, fantastic staff, but they're not horticulturists. They're not master gardeners and everything.
And this might be, I know the Sustainability Committee has begun. I'm not sure what the total mission of that committee is, but possibly there could be some type of a committee of people that does have knowledge. I myself
Yeah.
am a master naturalist, and I know quite a few people who are master gardeners. At one time, we had a very active Dirty Knees Garden Club, if you remember, and we used to have a fundraising where we donated money to different charitable organizations, and the plants that we sold were plants that people dug up in their yards. Well, when the jumping worm raised its dirty head, that sort of put a kibosh on the Dirty Knees Gardening Club. However, there are still those people out there. I think there are people that, if they had an opportunity, would be interested in getting involved.
Right. Definitely a threat. That's something that's one of the reasons we don't really try to operate a compost pile, because that can be an instant source for the jumping worms. If anyone's not, I do know enough to be dangerous on the jumping worms. Once you have them, they look like an earthworm, but they destroy the soil.
Yeah.
And make it basically, you can't grow anything in that soil.
Right.
So just the opposite. And a comment on the roundabouts. You're exactly right. So the two roundabouts on 138, the village is responsible for the landscaping in those two. And honestly, for the last 5, 7 years, whatever they've been there, Gary and Donna Dish have been out there weeding for many,
I've
many
noticed
years.
them out there.
This last year is the first year that we've tried kind of a pre-emergent down there, and I think it's been working really nicely. One side of me says it'd be great if it was just grass, because it's so much easier to maintain. But I would definitely welcome other ideas and options out there that would be either easy maintained or maintained by another entity that would know. Sometimes it's hard. I mean, when you're going out, it's hard to determine what is a weed and what is a native plant if you're not trained in that. The roundabouts that are north of McDonald's those are in Fitchburg, and those look sad a lot. You drive by them probably every day, a couple times a day.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people, call Fitchburg, tell them to take care of their roundabouts, because that whole area up there gets overgrown with grass, all the cracks fill in with grass. It just looks really bad. So.
About a month ago, I had some kind of angry conversations with, it was the Department of Public Works here. I have his card, because where I live, I have a hill in front of my property. So my property is lower than the road, and there's a hill there, and I have a prairie in my front yard. But this hill, when I first moved there, I would try to mow it because all the neighbors feel like they need to mow their hills. And at one point I decided it was very hard on the mower, for one, and I stopped mowing it. And then I started developing, I had a lot of beautiful milkweed growing there, and I've had conversations with the county over the last several years telling them, do not mow that. There's milkweed there. There's no reason to mow it. Well, this year somebody else was on the crew, and they came by and they chopped it up, and it looked really bad, and I was really mad. So Dale Austin came out and talked to me he's the assistant maintenance superintendent for the Department of Public Works. And he came out and talked to me. I guess
That's-
so, yeah.
I was gonna say,
It is.
because this is not Village of Oregon.
No, you know what, this was county, this was from the county.
Dane
that came
County,
out,
okay.
Because that's county
County
road there.
highway, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had a long conversation, and he said he was gonna make every effort not to have that mowed again. But then I took the opportunity and I said, you know, I drive into Oregon probably, well, a couple times a day. And the same time they chopped up my hill, they did a really chopped job entering the Village of Oregon. It looked terrible. And different people, I went to my sewing group that day, and the ladies there were saying, boy, that looks terrible. They just chopped it all up. It was not even. It looked terrible. So we had a conversation about that as well. And I noticed the next day, somebody came out and mowed it nice and smooth.
nice.
So I just think we really should be paying attention to how the entrance to our village looks.
Yeah, that whole stretch is city of Fitchburg
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and county,
Yeah.
and that's always a challenge.
He did make the comment about that there had been discussions about maybe turning some of that over to the Village of Oregon, which you guys would not appreciate. But I do think as we're entering the village, I mean, I can follow up a little bit about those roundabouts, but
Yeah.
I always see this area right before you get to McDonald's. There's an area with a couple of poles there and some wires,
Yep.
and it's just weeds. That could be natives. On the other side, same thing. That could be natives. You know, there could be some things done in the village to beautify it, to help the pollinators,
Yeah, that's good.
and to educate people.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Patty?
Hi, my name is Patricia Hill, and I live at 427 Jefferson Street in Oregon. And I want to say thank you to the village for all the great cleanup efforts that have went forth in cleaning up and taking out all the dead trees and trunks and things where Florida Avenue used to be. My house backs up to Florida Avenue, and I appreciate that the mowing that's been going on there. I think this is the first time in quite a few years that we've been somewhat dry back there, and I think that's contributed a lot to our sump pumps within that area slowing down from running. And I just would like to see that area mowed in the future. I'm not saying it has to be a weekly type of a mow, but to get in there when it is dry and keep it mowed dry, I think it contributes to the success of us not flooding out back there. And I don't remember all of the things that came out of some of our previous meetings with like Dane County, but I wanted to say, you know, they've been keeping the weeds down along the creek bed, which is great. And I've also noticed and even been paying attention to down by Quick Trip, where I'm assuming it's the city that has been keeping that cleaned up and mowed down. And I've seen the guys taking things of brush out of the creek to keep the water moving. It's just really good. I think it contributes to the success of us staying dry back there. And we've all went to efforts to put in drain tile and to do as much as we can do to help alleviate. I know it's been drier this year, but it's also, you know, it's been nice to be dry. And again, I think that's just going to contribute to the success of us staying dry. I mean, I realize when we back up to marsh, we can't control all the rodents. I've seen woodchucks and I've seen raccoons, and I can live with those, but the water I can't live with, you know, in terms of the flowing of that. So I want to appreciate the efforts that have been put forth already, and I would just like to see it contribute in the future
Okay.
in terms of that.
Thanks, Patty.
Yep, thank you.
Anybody else? There. Yeah.
I'm Joe Tempty, 294 North Main Street. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add other than one, just thank you for doing this again. I know years ago when you tried No Mow May, it was not overwhelmingly positive response, Jeff.
Yeah.
I thought it was wonderful, and obviously needs some tweaking, and we'll learn as we go forward. But I just want to mention that 82% of the land in Wisconsin is privately owned, which is typical of an eastern state. And the biggest value I see in the No Mow May that we did this year was that it got people's attention, right? And so I just like to encourage going forward that really kind of have an eye on public engagement and educating people about why decisions are being made, and maybe why we left this area, you know, mowed this area and didn't mow this area, or planted this area, or what you go forward when you go forward with the waterways, why the decisions were made, just to help people understand what they can do with their own properties. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
I'm Grant Schultz. I live at 113 Village View Court. We have a dry retention pond behind our house, right off of South Main. I don't have an issue with No Mow May. I've lived there now just over 6 months, so obviously new to the area, from the area growing up. Some things that we noticed comparing when the grass was longer to now, mosquitoes. I mean, it's very prevalent. We purchased the house because of, one of the main reasons is because of the green space behind our house. It's attractive. It looks very nice when mowed. I have young nieces and nephews, cousins, that love to come over. Our neighbors have grandkids that love to come over. Very recently, they're playing baseball back there because it was just mowed this past Thursday. They did bring the 2 brand new Toro mowers in. It took about 15 minutes to do. It wasn't very long. I think the concern I have with No Mow May is it grows so tall. When it comes in, they chop it. It's not obviously bagged or anything. It's just a hayfield, essentially, at that point. It's brown, and it's still brown to this day. We're mid to end of July. They mowed it on Thursday. You go out there, look right now, it's just a sea of dead grass. All it does is clog up the drains that I believe might be getting cleaned out here recently. It'd be nice to get a little bit more information on that. But we can also see the trees that are overgrowing in the drainage ditch. It's not as effective. With the longer grass, one of the things I noticed when they came in to mow right away, there's garbage everywhere, right? And with the long grass, you can't see it, which is nice. Obviously, it's not an eyesore. But we had shoes, there was plastic bags, there was, I mean, tarps, you name it, styrofoam out there. Once it gets mowed, it gets chopped up, and it lays there. No one comes to pick it up. The city's not going to come out there, pick everything up. I think the city has proposed to not have owners mow past their property line. I think that's fine. The issue I see, and just specifically on Thursday, eating lunch, watching them mow, they don't mow up to the property line. They came out, Digger's Hotline came, sprayed everything, put flags down. That was on city property. The mowing operations were at least 10 feet away from that. And the only reason it didn't go higher is the owners are mowing it. I think if they make it consistent, where we sent out a letter, no longer mow it, obviously remove your property, which that's a different issue.
Which we did, right?
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I think everyone has, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think if then the efforts are, instead of seeing a line that it's mowed to and we mow to that, if we start making the precedent of mowing the entire property, I think there will be a better collaboration. I think it's an eyesore when it's a sea of dead grass and it doesn't help with water removal in the times of need. That being said, it doesn't get too full ever, which is nice. I mean, it's not supposed to, but I think it could be more effective.
Do you ever see, like, how deep does it ever get back there?
This year, I've seen at one instance, I mean, it was probably a good 4 to 6 inches.
Okay.
Didn't last very long. It was, I think, the storm that the Stoughton had the small tornado. But just, what was it, Saturday?
Yeah,
That
Saturday
the big
night,
storm
yeah.
came through. I mean, I stuck the spotlight out the backyard when the power went out just to make sure there wasn't a tree in the middle of the yard or something. And it wasn't too full. I mean,
Yeah.
by daylight it appeared to be dry. Obviously
I
it
don't
wasn't,
think
it was
we've ever
soft.
seen Water, I don't think we've ever seen water ponding
Not
back there.
standing very
Yeah,
much.
it gets
no.
saturated, I know that.
Yeah.
So in that situation, I mean, that's one of the things that we struggle with, and on the No Mow May or the No Mow of areas, in one sense, I mean, let's just take that area or any of the dry detention ponds or the drainage swales, most notably the one that kind of goes from the intermediate school or intermediate school all the way down to Alpine Parkway. It's that Soden Drive. It crosses under Soden and that type of stuff. Those, when we let them grow for a whole month, and I've got some photos, I mean, turn up just really nice tall grass. Okay, if we mow that, we end up with clumps. We end up with all the grass clippings, and yeah, you're right. I think it can clog areas. In fact, there was one area, we had pictures of us mowing this area behind, yeah, where am I here? Where was that? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, it's right here, this blue area. And within No Mow May, the grass was up to the upper rim of our tractor. You know, so it was probably 4.5, 5 feet tall. I mean, it really could have easily been baled. In fact, in hindsight, we probably should have baled it and dried it and sold it as hay. So that's kind of what we're weighing. You know, honestly, if it's allowed to grow just super long and not mowed, the pond still functions really well. You could argue that the grass has a lot of water uptake from the grass, and that's kind of, you know, in one sense, it looks really good. Like Teresa said, it can prevent some of the weeds and other stuff from coming, so can mowing. And that's kind of where that's where we really struggle, because usually, like in this situation, like when it's behind your house, you know, if you ask anyone else, they probably say, I don't care, you know, but it does affect you, you know, because it's where you live. And that's what we're truly trying to get to the bottom of. And, you know, like in your situation, you know, we've been working with that for a while. And you have a situation where some people love the mowing and some people hate the mowing. And so, again, coming back to is how do you make that decision on what to do and where. And I think probably the mowing that was done just recently those were our 2 summer LTEs. I'm sure they didn't want to go all the way up, because we do have planned improvements out there. We're doing some maintenance out there as soon as things dry out again. But that's all good to go for repairing the outlets and the inlets of the pond to kind of do some maintenance out there.
Is there any information we could gather on that? Because again, we've only been there for 6 months, but the one inlet into that retention pond is completely adjacent to our property.
Right. So what's happening there, just we don't have any design drawings or anything. What we're doing there is we're probably just going to extend that pipe another, I think we were going like 4 feet.
Yeah.
Little 4 feet, just because it really just ends, and it's a really steep slope there. So we want to bring that out and then taper that slope around.
Okay. Is there going to be any like dirt removal? Because if you look at that inlet right there, I mean, there's a standing water puddle.
Right.
Because the sediment has raised so high there, which
Right.
is to be expected.
Yeah. We'll probably try to raise that up as much as we can, because there's a pretty good slope coming out of that. So we'll be tying it, but we'll only have 4 feet to really work with, so it could only be a few inches. But what I've asked Nick and the staff to do is, in that area, is obviously we need to extend that, put a better end section on it, or create a much better end section on it. And then what we've been using at some of the outlets is we've been using we call it a turf reinforcement mat. It's a kind of a woven plastic mat that goes underneath the vegetation, allows the vegetation to grow through it, and then creates kind of an armoring of there, so it's not rock. We don't want to put rock in there because that just ends up looking terrible. Well, we want something that we can be able to mow over. And so we've done that and then used sod and staked sod below that. The caveat to that is we would then probably ask someone like you or whatever if you could mind spraying some water on it occasionally just to get it, because it only works if it's alive and rooted. So, but we've been trying to, I know you've been there 6 months or something, so we've actually been communicating fairly regularly through letters and phone calls and that with residents back there. So
Yeah, I think we got one letter just with the removal of the property, and obviously that was generalized.
Yeah.
And not to mow out there. And our property, when we got a rock wall essentially that is right near the edge, so it's not like there's much mowing past that.
Right. Right.
But I think just understanding what that maintenance is, because we are going to have landscaping out there as well.
Right.
When those are kind of coinciding, if there's
Yeah.
going to be issues there.
We were actually planned to come out there today,
Okay.
but we've kind of reassigned that to hopefully allow things to dry out a little better. We were hitting a pretty good time period, and then this last weekend storm really did kind of mush things up back there. But that's kind of the plan, and we've been working on that area back there with residents for the last 2 years, 2.5 years probably, maybe even longer.
So in the picture, kind of where 847 and 113 meet there, that's the drainage ditch that is going to be
Yes, so
repaired.
Exactly. So
Yep.
there's three areas of repair. We're going to come in and take, there's a pipe that runs along here and dumps out right about here. So we're going to extend that about 4 to 5, 6 feet out into here, put a new, or well, either probably try to reuse the existing end section, and then area around there will have some topsoil put in there to help blend that in, seed and mulch, and we've been using a mat, straw mat type of stuff for erosion protection. We're also going to come in here. This area has some trees that are growing near the inlet. If you go over there, the inlet is, or the inlet end section is actually separated a little bit, so we're going to get that back into shape. And then the outlet is over here, and we have a ditch that goes through here, so there's going to be some shaping to try to get that to flow better. And if our hope is that if that can flow better, then it'll allow us to be able to, when we, if and when we get back there to mow, we can mow. So that's kind of the work that we're planning on doing there.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern or improvement that we could make is, right, if we let the grass grow, like you said, in some locations, 4+ feet, right, and you go chop it, baling it, it's efforts, and the city probably doesn't have baling equipment.
No.
So that's either outsourced or purchased.
Correct.
So I think there are benefits with more consistent mowing, right, that doesn't allow that, because mulching is fine, it breaks down if it's done appropriately.
Right.
Right now, I mean, how many mows is it going to take for that bed of dead to be gone?
Right.
Don't know.
Yeah, when we started then in June, actually it was about, 3 or 4 days before the end of June, I think 3 days before the end of June, when we decided, okay, we're going to start going out and mowing. My instructions were, let's raise the mowers up as high as possible, and we'll go over it. It's going to look like a really bad haircut. And then wait a few days, let it spring back, come back and do it again, same height, and it would take, we figured it would take probably 2 to 3 passes. Now that was not always done, I think, right? I think there were a few individuals that maybe were out there that just kind of plowed through it. But again, other things like when we talked about how we can improve things in the future, those are things we were looking at.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen significant decrease in mosquitoes. We really enjoy the quiet area back there, and fires, bonfires.
Yeah.
Our pets
It's a nice
out there.
area. People don't even know it exists back there.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, and it's beautiful. We love to see it. I think just a little bit shorter grass at times. If it is once a year for a month that it happens, right, we can put up with it. I think just the maintenance of it after that time could be improved.
Great.
Thank you
you so much.
Yep.
Walt?
Walt Tim, 113, or excuse me, 121 Village Court. We're neighbors to Dan and to Grant. Jeez, he just moved in, I still can't remember his name. We're neighbors to Grant and his wife. We purchased the property primarily because of the green space. And when we bought it, we were told by the realtors they had not the foggiest idea of where the property lines were. We really didn't care because we just had a nice big green space back there. And I asked who took care of it, and they said, well, typically the village mows it. Well, that was the first summer we were there, and that was the summer evidently that typically the village wasn't on task with their mowing. So I like something neat. So I went out and I started mowing it. And I had a little push twirl mower, and it didn't bother me to mow a third of that green space with my little push mower because it looked really nice. And then I started talking with some of the neighbors, and we talked about how nice it looked, and we thought, well, why don't we just keep mowing the whole thing? Well, then I have a neighbor who absolutely is I think the neighbor is the biggest reason that this No Mow may have come to a head. That's just my opinion. Because she would be on my case every time I would do something out there. And I know there's been times, Jeff, when she's called you saying I've been out there doing something and I haven't been.
We're not talking about personal disputes here and everything, so I want to keep it focused on, let's talk about
Okay.
you and
Okay,
what
the reason
your
that I mowed, the reason
thoughts
that the
are.
rest of the neighbors mowed out there was because we wanted it to look nice. When the village would come out, they would have gentlemen, young folks. It's not my property, so why should I care? It's really kind of what it looked like. They would come out on days after it rained, and it would regardless of what the piece of equipment was, and it would dredge into that grass something fierce, and it would just leave big ruts. We as property owners have to look at that every morning. We look back and see the ruts. Now we look back and see nothing but dead grass. We've seen nothing but dead grass since June. And it's just not, just not getting a whole lot better, and I don't see how it's going to get any better. The question I have is why can't property owners, if we would choose to want to mow, why can't we mow? Is there an ordinance against that?
We've had our attorney look into that, and it is not a cut and dry situation, because for this reason, in as much as the village has allowed private citizens and groups to mow certain areas at the permission of the village board. And I'm thinking the only example I can think of that right now is the Oregon Soccer Club. And the Oregon Soccer Club has come before, asked for certain things like, can we fertilize our soccer fields that they use? And can they do additional mowing? And by permission by the village board has said, yes, that's okay. Because, if we don't get to the soccer fields in the same frequency that the soccer would like, it basically said then, gives them the opportunity to come in, bring a mower and mow it down to, the level that they want to. But that's the only situation that we really have individuals that are permitted to mow parks and all that type of stuff in the village. We kind of keep back from that because we've had requests for people to put bees and bee hives and stuff on public property. We have requests from people to, we have, I always call it generously landscape areas outside of their property. And, those are just areas that we have to kind of make sure that, I think as our attorney has kind of told us, the public property is public, private property is private, and that people should really contain their activities to their own property. And so that's what we've enforced. And that's probably the best answer I can give you. Probably not the answer you want to hear.
But since it's No Mow May, as I've driven around town, I've seen an awful lot of areas that are not private property that are being mowed by the property owners that are village property, and everything seems to be fine. Now, I go out with my mower and all
Yeah,
hell breaks
not
loose.
familiar with those areas, I'm sorry. You'll have to, I mean, you can send me a list, and we would deal with those in the exact same
But
way that we've had
it's-
to
I
correct you
can't,
on.
I cannot step outside of my boundary.
Is that, okay?
And when it comes to the point of being threatened,
I don't know if you've been threatened. You've been asked not to.
I've been threatened.
Okay.
And I think it's gotten to the point of where it's just an absolute joke. And during No Mow May, we would drive around town, the parkways. I mean, I'm sorry. It looked terrible. It looked trashy. It looked junky. And we've got a nice community here where people want to come in and move into, if they can afford to move into town. And they have to drive down these parkways that just look terrible. They'll mow them, and yet they won't edge them. It's like nobody takes responsibility for it being their own property. I'll go out and mow it, but by golly, I'm not gonna make it look nice. It's my job to mow it, and I'll mow it, and that's what I'm gonna do.
So you're saying that of our staff?
I think so. I think I could be fairly consistent on a lot of areas in town. I'd say that's probably true, yes.
Okay. We'll take that under consideration.
That's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Walt. Yes.
Hi, my name's Caitlin Brengos. I also live at 113 Village View Court. I only have one question. So on a lot of the properties that butt up to that ditch, the property line is actually on a pretty steep slope where it may be a little bit hazardous. I know it is, at least for me, if I'm pushing down our hill on my property. I wouldn't be able to stop my mower. Is that gonna be still acceptable? Like if we do end up having to mow past there? Like, because we are doing the landscaping, as Grant had alluded to, so we are gonna actually be rounding off kind of where all the rocks and stuff are there and grassing it, and we want to make it look nice, but then again, we need to know where we should be stopping that and starting it. So we just don't want it to be a hazardous slope, so when we're taking that into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, it should be stopped and started at the property line. Yeah, that's what we would ask anyone that would border any of our areas.
Okay, and then, so since some of the areas are sloped, are different mowers going to come mow that area?
Do you want to take that one?
Basically, all the mowers we have should be able to mow those slopes. If they can't mow it sideways, they can always go up and down, so.
Okay,
I don't see that being an issue, to be honest.
They just haven't been doing that historically, at least what we've seen this year.
Okay.
So that would be, I guess, my only request is if they could go to the actual property line, now that you have those nice stakes out there to
Sure.
mark those things, if they could actually just go to that place, we won't feel like we're encroaching on a space we shouldn't.
I know one of the things that when we tried to reduce mowing back in 2016-17 time period, one of the instructions I gave to the staff at the time was to mow it was one width of the Toro mower, so 16 feet wide from the property back into the drainage way, and that was kind of considered a buffer. And I think it actually worked really well, because it, like you said, it kind of gave that, it took care of from the property in a little bit, and then also it gave kind of a walking buffer if people want to walk in the drainage way and that type of stuff. But yeah, we should be mowing up to our property boundaries.
Okay, yeah, that's really the one thing I've noticed, otherwise it looks
And always
fine.
feel free, I mean, any of our emails and phones always work, you know, and we always ask people to, you know, as long as it's respectful, you go ahead and email us, and we'd be happy to either respond or, I mean, we get phone calls. We cover a lot of areas, and we don't have eyes on everything, so we do really rely on our residents to sometimes bring things to our attention, and some things are hidden. All right, I mean, and, you know, there was, I think, last year, same thing, you know, I all of a sudden found out that we're not mowing that area back there, and I said, why aren't we mowing it? Well, because it's always mowed. And so that's when we kind of had to do a change in policies and everything. But always feel free to reach out, anyone in the village to reach out and talk to us about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yes.
Hi,
Hi,
I'm Rosalind Tim,
Rosalind. Nice to meet you.
121 Village View Court. Almost everything has been covered from what I came to talk about. I did want to let you know that when we first moved in, before any work was done back there in that drainage, I always wanted lake property, so after a great rain, we did have a lot of water that sat for a while. It is now flowing a lot better than it did with the work that has been done so far since we've been there during that time. One suggestion I have, and I don't know if this needs to go to the Public Works or something else, I love Oregon. We lived here 20 years ago and moved for a job and then came back. And I really like to be very, very proud of the town that I'm living in. Whether it's the drainage, whether it's the side roads, the roundabouts, or whatever. And I feel that the people in Oregon in general could do a little bit better in keeping their properties up on the main roads coming in, especially into town and out of town. I didn't know if there's a possibility of maybe having like promote 1 month during the year where this is, let's groom Oregon, let's trim up the edges, let's clean up the curbs and the gutters, trim your trees, mow your yard, just to really promote the beauty of Oregon that's kind of being forgotten. And the other thing I wanted to say, I understand trying to keep the areas for like life preserves for the flowers and everything else. The same aspect, we moved into a home development, and we really want our homes, at least we do, that area to look really nice. If the weeds are growing, like in our backyard, like Grant had said, they were at least 3 foot plus high. They were so high. And it's going to probably take to next year to get better. But I really felt that maybe we need to consider mowing more, more often rather than letting a whole month worth of growth go by. But we do appreciate what you're doing. I know you are in an endless job, but
Yeah, it's hard, but it's what we do, right?
Yep.
I will say one of the things that Lauren is working on, and I'm working with her on it, that we have a plan is the village does not have, our ordinances are kind of woefully out of date. And we are working on I want to call it a landscaping ordinance of some sort that right now, about the only thing we have in all of our ordinance says that you can't have noxious weeds above 12 inches. Plants and noxious weeds above 12 inches. There's a lot of unknown with what necessarily that means, and so we want to be able to clean that up. We have problems in the village of houses not being painted, junk out in people's yards. We have some stuff that for garbage and, it doesn't collect vermin and that type of stuff, but a lot of it is very out of date. So our hope is to try to get more of a public nuisance ordinance in place that could actually cause for fines and people, so that we could actually have more control over getting people to trim up their trees, clean their vegetation up. Like right now, if somebody has a house and their front shrubs are just growing like mad, there's really nothing that we can do about that at all, unless it's right on a public property or if it's blocking sight lines or causing a nuisance. But generally, there's not a lot we can do. So we're hoping to be able to give ourselves more tools to be able to address things like that. So,
good.
Yeah.
We want to be proud of our village.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rosalind. Anybody else? What about any questions that we might be able to help answer as people have spoken, or as any of us have spoken? Yes. Hi.
Hi, I'm Robin Hunter. I live at 416 South Burr Oak. I've been there since 1994. When I moved in, my property was 3 years old, and at that time, we moved in winter, so at that time, we didn't know what was behind us. But towards the spring, we realized there was this huge green space, and it has really served its purpose. I'm not so worried about aesthetics, but it has served its purpose. I've seen it rain up, and I've measured it, up until 6 inches of overflowing. There's a farmer's field behind there, which is really nice. It's got a prairie. She maintains it really well. But I've just felt that it has not been maintained. It was mowed.
The prairie or the
green
area in blue?
space, the green space.
Okay.
It has not been mowed, like up on the close areas towards your property. I know about grass, I know about pollinators because they're in my yard now. I have this tall duck grass that it's near impossible to get rid of, and I know that came probably from the field behind the green space. I guess my question is that, has there been a study done? Are there going to be any studies done to, if that green space would go away, I'd actually be moving. I wouldn't stay in the village. So another consideration is your resale of your property.
Right.
You show your property and then you show them the backyard, and there's basically marsh. So right now, my neighbor on one side, the silt has built up so much in the drain that all we have, like 4 years ago, they came and graded it out, but the water just sits there. And so my neighbor right now, he weed whacks it and mows it just to keep, and garbage comes in. My kids and I used to clean up the garbage that was in the drain. The other drain on the other side, it has weeds. It actually had a tree growing in it. I asked to have it cleaned up.
That's the one that's kind of up here, right? This is Burr Oak. This is so there's like one here and one here, right? I think.
Well, it's one big. There's actually the farmer's field is Town of Oregon.
Yep, that's
and we are
Gwen's
village,
place back
yep.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the thing is it has a purpose, and in fact, the water, does go quite up to the top, and I'm concerned about getting water in my basement. But it also floods into the park too,
Right.
and that's where there's tons of mosquitoes and everything. When we let this grow, I don't know if it was like 3-4 years ago, you basically could have hayed it to cut it down.
Yeah.
We already get animals from the farmer's field. We have woodchucks, we have raccoons, we have possums, we have all of that.
Foxes probably, yeah.
To contend with, which is fine, but if it all goes to, Prairie or whatever, they're just gonna be living. And we've seen cranes in the drainage ditches, because they're finding a new place to live. So I guess my question is whether we would do a study about it, or, I'm just, I don't wanna
Yeah.
live in my backyard having it just full of, marsh and everything, because that's what'll end up happening, and then it'll end up in my basement, so.
So yeah, I can say to you that we're not going to get rid of the stormwater feature part, because so this area has like an end wall down here, and it's kind of a weir wall for.
Yep.
So all of this was part of the permitted, as I understand it, permitted part of the subdivision, so that everything drains down here. There's some retention in this, and then it flows out, like you said, into Bethel Green Acre Park. So we're not allowed to take that away, you know. So that's going to stay there with its intended purpose.
Okay.
The only thing we can ever do is, in any kind of maintenance that we do to it, we need to make sure, first of all, that any maintenance we do is keeping the capacity of that pond in place, so that it's actually, it's going to continue to function as it was designed to function. So we can't like take half of it away and then expect that to function in the same way, But vegetation is one of those tricky things. Like a grassed swale will operate just about as well as a plain swale, a non-grass swale. In fact, you could argue it'd be better if it were grassed. So from that standpoint, nothing would change. The question, like you're saying, is whether if it were to go to a prairie mix versus being mowed on a regular basis? And that's a great question. You know, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, it would be good to do a study, just in terms of, you know, maintaining, having it not go to swamp. And I understand if it's purposely for, you know, drainage to get the water moving and everything, but
Well,
right
to
now
retain,
it's
it's
just.
actually to retain water for a short period of time.
Right.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah, that's the focus of it.
Yep.
And stormwater drainage has changed, or stormwater detention has changed over the years. Do you want to comment on that a little bit? Because that's, Lauren joined us out of City of Madison as a stormwater engineer and has spent a lot of her career doing stormwater. So.
Yes, and Jeff is totally right that everyone in this room, I'll keep this brief because I'm sure you all know, stormwater climate has changed in the past 20 years, certainly before that, but most notably in the past 20 years. And the way that we evaluate how these things work and how they function and whether they meet their goals has changed really dramatically over the years. And one of the biggest frustrations that we run into with stormwater design and stormwater engineering is you look at some of these systems that were put in place years ago, and in some cases they were designed, and in some cases they weren't, and you say, well, that just isn't meeting what we do today. Even if they were done correctly, and I will say we ran into this a lot in Madison, that things were kind of just put in with very little regard to what was being designed around. But even those that were designed, they simply don't serve the same purpose today that they did back then. One thing I would like to share is that we have put in our budget for next year an overhaul of the village's stormwater management plan. And we're moving ahead with that, hopefully. It's an important piece of looking at things holistically. And what it's going to allow us to do, we do this once every 10 to 15 years, but what it's going to allow us to do is take all of these different little stormwater components that were designed for and put into place 20, 30, 40 years ago, take a look at what they look like today and what the system built around them looks like, and evaluate not just whether they're meeting whatever they were designed to meet, but whether circumstances have changed on the ground too. And can we improve these things without, you know, making things worse for people downstream? So this is absolutely an area that we'll be looking at. We'll go in, we'll take a look at that pond and what actually is there today versus what was designed, and the whole system around it, the pipes, the drainage, the topography, and evaluate whether or not there are things that we can do that, you know, will benefit certain areas whilst not making life worse for those downstream. So we'll absolutely be taking a look at this area. I can't tell you what the study will say, but that's on people's radar, and we definitely want to do that.
Yeah, it's just this one, it's not been maintained, and what they did is they graded it like this instead of grading it out, so now everything sits there, and it's really swampy, and you know, you don't see anything moving at all. It's just a big flood now. And birds hang out in it, but my neighbor's trying to weed whack and maintain it. And I'm like, that's not yours to do.
Yeah, correct. That is correct.
So,
Yeah, we're trying to, one of the things that Nick and I have talked about is, you know, how can we maintain our stormwater ponds, drainageways, and everything like that in a more effective manner? And I think, you know, for a long time, we've kind of had them built. They're just built, and then we don't pay attention to them unless something happens, a problem or a leak or trees growing or a neighbor complaint. And we really want to be more proactive than reactive. And so, I don't know if you've been back there a lot. Do you know?
Yeah.
We
cleaned that, like you said, probably 5-6 years ago. We cleaned the men walls out, but yeah, we haven't been back there since, really.
well, if you look at it, there's silt growing.
Yep.
And so it has no place to go, and so then it just sits there. And for us, we have Thomas Court, so all of that rainwater comes down. So I'm on the east side of Burr Oak, so it has to go someplace, so.
Yeah, just about everything, Burningwood Way, Lisa Court, Thomas Court, all that storm sewer system comes right down to that area, yeah. And maybe at, you know, if and when this parcel ever becomes part of the village, which is Gwen's parcel over there, we look at that as possibly an opportunity where we could do some improvements back there from a stormwater standpoint. And that might help things in the future, we don't know. We can only speculate on if and when that would ever, it would take them likely requesting to be annexed and try to develop it or something like that.
Yeah, it's town now, so I don't know how they would do that.
Well, they would come to the village with a petition to annex,
Right.
and then that would go through a standard review process and through the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission and Village Board and all of that. And there'd be an annexation agreement. There's a lot of meetings that have to happen, but it, you know, is obviously, if you look on the map, it's just like a little island in here in the village, and
Yeah.
so someday, but for now, it's, like you said, kind of a farm and a prairie back there.
So I have the best of both worlds. So
Yeah.
I get to see that, I get to see all the wildlife. I just don't want it in my backyard, which it tends to migrate. Everything migrates from that field in all year
Sure.
round. And
Sure.
in the wintertime, it especially comes in. We have vole holes all over, and it just has to move somewhere warm.
Yeah.
So we see that a lot, so anyway, well, thank you
Okay,
so much.
thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Robin. Any other audience questions or further comments, thoughts, ideas? Okay. We'll stick around here for a few minutes. If you have any questions or would like to talk to any of us a little more, we'd be happy to answer questions. You can find all our information as well on the website. We'll take comments from on email and everything. Peggy would like the forms. If you have those forms, you can turn those into her. That way she makes sure she has the right information and probably mostly spellings on names. That's probably the most important thing. We will be having another one of these. I think we'll probably be trying to do a weekend morning, maybe a Saturday morning time slot for those who may not be able to make it on a evening time period like this, and that'll probably come, I would guess, in September is my guess. So otherwise, thank you so much to everyone for coming out, and we look forward to hearing more comments. Thank you. See you, Joe.